composing gloves here, and this is another combined video. I know there's 3 in a row, and you people who like sheet music, probably, I'm not sure, you should be getting this, honestly. Like, writing out sheet music, it's just a hassle to do it. It's easier to just play. Like, most people sit at a piano and explain this stuff. They don't even look at sheet music. So, yeah. Because that's like, if you want to get into like compositional and part writing and stuff, then sheet music sort of becomes a more important thing to look at. Okay, so what is this one about? Again, we're just looking at chord progressions, which is one reason why, sheet music's not a huge deal. And it is called the secondary dominant. Ooh. Now, if you understand circular chord progressions, you should get this pretty darn quickly. So what is a secondary dominant? Well, it's whenever, so you're playing in your, your chord progression. You start on the 3 chord. So, you're going along, you're playing your thing, maybe you're getting jazzy along the way, adding in 7ths, doing alterations, you're being a musician, hopefully not on drugs. And what is the deal with the secondary dominant? Well, you want to spice things up. It's a little boring the way things are going right now. So you think to yourself, oh, I know what I'll do, because you think back to this circular chord progression thing. You're like, this 5-1 thing is an interesting deal we have going on here. So you're like, why don't I use that with a chord only chromatically? That's pretty much the idea behind it. Why don't I do it chromatically? So I'm going to play my 1 chord. I'm going to go to my 3 chord because that's immediately where I want to go to do the chord progression back to the 1 chord. But instead of going to the 3 chord, I think to myself, what is the 5th to this chord? What's the major 5th? Like if I were playing an E major, what would be the 5th to this? Because if I play that chord, that would be a 5-1, which would sound really strong. This is also a good way to change keys too, if you use it wisely. I'm not going to talk about that though. That's, you just do your thing and you'll figure it out. So what is the deal with this? Well, we could play we think, it's a B. It's a B major. B natural major. That's the 5 chord. So it's like, and that, that has a sort of, that's 3 half steps, because C to B natural is a half step, E to E flat's a half step, and G to F sharp or G flat is a half step. But in this case, I look at them as sharps because it's a B natural major chord. And then that will pull to our 3. So because we're moving in the key of C. So C major to the B natural major, that's like a really interesting movement because it's the 3 half step slide thing. So it's sort of really closely knit type deal. We could do inversions and maybe get something a little bit different, depending on also how you voice the chord. It's not always going to work out like this. But you have C, and so you're like, this will be the 5-1, which will then, like, we can now go through our chord progression as we normally would. It's called a secondary dominant because we took whatever our chord was and we went right before it and we put the dominant chord, and it's the second chord. I guess it's right before, so I perceive it as the first whatever, but they're named secondary dominant chords, okay? And so we'll do that. So we'll play, instead of playing this 1 3 6 2 5 1, we're going to play 1. Now we're going to play the secondary dominant to the 3 chord, which would be. And now here, actually, this pulls out really nicely. We'll go to the 3 chord. And now, that sounded really nice. Let's do that one more time. Let's just do root positions to keep it simple. Yeah, because the second inversion has weird properties. So remember anyways. So we go there and we're, okay. So that sounds really good. What if we were to do that for a different thing besides the 3 chord? Well, we could do it for let's think of the 2 chord. So let's say that's the 2 chord and this key is D minor. And they're like, okay, that's A. It's A is the 5th. So you're going on, now improvisers, they just know their scales and their chords and their intervals so fast. They're just like bang, 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 bang. They had like a machine gun that was like their brain on chord progressions. That sounded interesting. Man, we would all be dead. So whatever that meant. So, okay, we're going to play. So what are we going to do here? Let's say that we want to play 1 5. We want to play instead 1 2 5 4 1. Let's say that was the chord progression we wanted to do for some reason. So what we're going to do now, instead, to emphasize this progression to the D minor, we're going to use an A major chord. It's important to remember this is a chromatic movement. So we're looking at the secondary dominant. So the second the chord we want to go to is the D minor chord. So we're going to go to the so if we were in D major, the dominant chord would be A major. So we're going to go C, A major, D minor. So we have C, A major, D minor. Now we have that progression, which will pull nicely to the 5, to the 1. So, hey, that's pretty cool. That's the secondary dominant chord progression. So you can toss that in there, spice things up. I believe this does not work for the 4th, I believe, because if you think about the 4th, the 5th would be the 1 chord. And so, okay, here's an example. You're in C major, and you're like, oh, I want to go to the 4 chord next, right? Like for whatever reason, that's the next chord you want to go to. So right there, and you're like, oh, I'll pull a secondary dominant, and you think about it, you're like, oh, well, wait a second. If this isn't it doesn't always have to be right. I'm putting it at the beginning of all my chord progressions, but you can be playing around and this could come into play, but then you run the risk of running an early resolution if you do this. But it makes sense right now. Okay, so C, and then we think F chord, right? Because that's going to be our, the next chord we're going to play. We're going to do a secondary dominant to that. Well, wait a second. That secondary dominant would be C major. So it's like, what do we do? This? Like, yeah, so it's the same chord, so it doesn't really apply. Now, what I was saying earlier about it whole being at the end thing, we could play some other chords. This also would run the risk of resolving early, though, depending on how you did it. But we could go 1, 5, we go 2, and then we could pull the secondary dominant to F, which would be C. Now you see, I went with the second inversion because I knew that would sound very unresolved. And so in that case, it worked out for me. But if I were to do it in another direction, it wouldn't work. So you could put the secondary dominant, anywhere in your chord progression, make it work with whatever you're doing. But the idea is you create a sudden like, what was that? And then, ooh, one of those. You remember the oohs from the other videos? Ooh, ah, ooh. You remember those? Yeah, I remember those. So yeah, that's how you do that. So let's do this for like the 5th. So the 5th would be D, so we'll play D major. Now I don't want to pull it right at the beginning of the chord because I've done that a bunch. So we will go right before we get to the 5th. Instead of playing the 2 chord as a minor chord, I'll play it as a major chord to do a secondary dominant to the 5 chord. Another sort of convention that just happens when you're writing is you'll put these on the weak beat. So you'll put it right on the weak beat. That way it's like da, and then extra crunchy, and then boom, like to the 5. It sounds really nice. That just so you know, when you're writing these things out, they tend to happen that way. So we'll do a 5. We'll go to 6. What the heck? And then we'll go to D major. And then we'll go, that's the pull. That's like the what is going on. And we'll go to the 5. There you go. That's the secondary dominant movement. And we'll go back to the 1. It's a very short chord progression, but hey, some people die young. So, and you could just start messing around with things there. So that's the power of the secondary dominant chord. Combine this with all the other stuff in the previous videos, and you're going to start getting some pretty crazy sounding things. It's kind of scary to think 7 chords are still not involved in these progressions. I'm not even sure. I'll probably have videos at some point that involve them. But yeah, subscribe and have a blessed day. Extrapolated from this as we did from the others. So first, so what is a minor 7 chord? Well, it's simply a minor chord with a minor 7. So it's like a dominant 7, only a dominant 7 has a major chord with a lowered 7th. Now I use lowered instead of flat because it's more accurate. Although I may say flat occasionally, just from habit.